Hello and welcome to Highly Informed. I'm your host, Shaun Salvaje. Highly Informed is all about entheogenic education and news you can use when it comes to the world of cannabis and psychedelics. I'm here for our final episode, and you guys, I'm excited for this one because we get to talk about all things sports and cannabis. Yes, we can't take it too seriously up here at MJ Biz. We have to talk about sports cannabis, athletic cannabis, performance optimization, one of my favorite topics. I don't know if it's a little known fact. I love jiu-jitsu. I love the fight scene. I am a big sports nerd. I used to want to be a sports broadcaster, but instead I ended up in the military, and so did my guest. I'm here with Steven Philpott and Earle Lawrence at
Anzisha Consulting.
Anzisha Consulting. I don't want to get my country accent messed up in there with that beautiful name it's a Zimbabwe. It's inspired by a word in Zimbabwe. From Swahili. Oh, man. Yeah. Now I need to brush up on my Swahili.
No, there all good.
My Swahilian friends will be so upset. No, there's there's Swahilian. That's not, what country is Swahili spoken?
Yeah, West African.
West Africa. I need to educate myself. Well, thank you for joining me. And I'm really excited to have you on because you're a Marine. You were a Marine. You
Correct.
did a few years, 8 years of service.
Yeah, so 4 active duty, and then you do 4 inactive reserve. But I was injured when I came back anyway, so my 4 inactive reserve years were the beginning of me going to college and starting to get my education afterwards.
Ooh, so after, and you deployed. Where did you end up going?
So I was part of the 22nd MU in 2011. I was part of the emergency response team to Libya. So I spent 12, 13 months overseas.
Oh my goodness.
And by the time I came back, I found out that I had fractured my leg a couple times and needed 2 surgeries that led to a lot of opioids and honestly my decision to go into human health and performance research.
I want to dig into that a little bit more because it's not like the fact that you had a fractured leg would seem very shocking to most, but in the military, ignoring things and all the like compounding stress fractures that people will just run around with until it's too late also parallels a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners who like to run themselves into the mud until it's too late, as well as athletes, like those top high performing athletes who do the same thing that we can all learn from. Like, I think that's something that is really powerful about bringing sports cannabis to the forefront and bringing athletic performance and how your endocannabinoid system is affected by your consumption in ways both beneficial and perhaps less optimizing, so that we can learn how to really fine tune our systems and what we're using, not just for athletes, not just for veterans who are looking for recovery or that high performance edge, but also for the regular person out there who is just trying to live a healthier life.
Absolutely.
Earl, what about you? What brought you to the work? Like, how did you first get connected to cannabis?
So my background started with like a medical kind of history in terms of it balanced out kind of the wellness in terms of health and wellness. I had a lot of surgeries growing up. I beat cancer, and so over like
so casual.
Yeah.
I
over
beat
like
cancer.
a 15-year journey, I just didn't want to focus on it too much. It gets you hung up on like getting away from the message.
Yeah.
But it does make me sympathetic towards patients, and I've been a care provider, if you will, in what they call the legacy market for over a decade. I went to an HBCU, North Carolina A&T. I got kicked off campus freshman year for cannabis related, but it helped shape who I am and like a lot of the other professional like experiences. After college, I went to New York to work on marketing in finance, but also independent contracting, like as a consultant, doing web design, doing social media, doing all the kind of things that we try to provide for businesses now. And through that, I got to help build the website for a company that wanted to develop their own incubator. And after that, they had me help build the website and the program for the incubator. And so I became one of the facets in that. And that led us to want to try to provide those kind of resources to programs today, to businesses, to entrepreneurs.
And that's kind of what you guys are doing now, is you're bringing the business edge along with that performance optimization and you're a scientist.
Correct.
Like you're not just a Marine,
Yeah.
not just a cannabis entrepreneur. Although those two things are really difficult. You're also a scientist who's developing well-researched body of knowledge to help us understand this. Why do I get so fired up about sports cannabis? Or athletic cannabis, because I know, like having trained jujitsu, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of 10th Planet.
Yeah.
They consume a lot. Yeah. High Rollers is out here. And there's something to be said about when you're working out or performing with cannabis, there's a whole nother level of experience that it's almost like the runner's high.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any data that matches, like, or have you studied anything that can help us understand what's going on with the people who report that they feel more focused, more complete, or more just able to get through their workout because there's less pain? Like, what are you noticing as far as trends?
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't my my personal data, because we all know doing U.S. Data inside of this great United States is quite restricted. But
yes,
the good thing about world research is there's a ton of research that shows about what we call being in the zone. So whether it's an artist on stage who is going, in on a guitar solo, whether it's an athlete who just scored a bunch of points and they kind of look at the crowd and they're like, I don't know where I am. That quote unquote zone is a really good balance of internal peace, not feeling your body too much, but also you can focus really, on a task that you can accomplish almost automatically. So what's interesting is that zone that we naturally get through sports, it's part of the endocannabinoid system and one of its natural benefits. So you don't have to consume cannabis, but if you're doing yoga, if you're working out, musicians, all these people get into what we call flow states.
So you mean that runner's high is actually something that might be at play within the endocannabinoid system endogenously?
Yeah, so I guess this is kind of the fun, like, public education piece. And when Earl says that, Anzisha, we do a lot of marketing and brand development and different things like that, what I really like to do is help educate businesses, because it's hard to be in an industry that you maybe don't know about. So we were on a podcast today and we were talking about the endocannabinoid system is 600 million years old, but the cannabis plant is only 20 million years old. So there's animals that have had endocannabinoid systems before the plant ever existed. So that just shows how everything on the earth evolves to kind of work together. And cannabis, as much as we focus on it, is really teaching us about this new system within ourselves. So that's part of, some of the educational initiatives that we really want to provide to athletes so they feel empowered to speak on themselves.
So tell me more about those services you guys are working with. You found a way to help bridge the gap between athletic performance and human performance optimization with branding and marketing services. How did this all come about?
Should I tell the story?
Tell me the story.
So after my injury in the Marines, when I came back from deployment, my unit actually rolled their flags up and we all separated. It's a very difficult time when you get back from deployment. So separating like that was even more difficult.
Yeah.
Being injured was even more difficult. When Earl says that he had, his run-in in college and, he obviously had that incident, I actually was stationed in the same state. So when I was injured, I didn't feel safe. I didn't like how opioids made me feel. I went to somebody's house who I knew. And while I was there, I was scratching. I was breaking out. I was having all these alternative kind of bad side effects. And I was like, I see how opioids can really mess somebody up. And Earl came to me and he said, you don't have to feel this way if you don't want to. And that's an interesting way to put that. If you don't want to feel this way, there's other alternatives. And after a gravity bong, a gas mask, a 6-foot bong, I don't know what else was involved.
Wait, he hooked you up? He hit it up?
So what was really funny because...
So you set your friend up. You're the one, you made the introduction. How do you feel about that?
It's not the first time. We've been around each other since like 3rd grade. So.
Nonchalant.
Yeah.
Just a low-key OG over there.
Yeah, but that experience was powerful for me because I had friends that were overdosing on the legal pills that I was prescribed. So
the veteran population.
Right.
So when you were saying you're itching, you're not describing like most people would associate that with perhaps someone who's using heroin, but you're saying that you were having the same reactions to the prescription medication that they were giving you to treat what was going on after you returned home from your deployment.
Yeah. So, nightmares from, you have a surgery.
Mhm.
And then after your surgery, you get opioids, but you're in pain. You're attempting to sleep. These things are, messing with your digestive system. So now you have all these other ailments because you're attempting to relieve your body from the pain of surgery, but you've just caused 7 other side effects.
Compounding whatever else you might have already had from environmental. They give you a burn pit register. You've got probably those things and amplified now. So when you first received your prescription, what were your thoughts? Like, were you worried at all? How did that whole thing kind of progress for you to the point where you realized there was some other option? Like you said, you don't have to live this way.
Yeah, I think it was interesting when we came back from deployment. While we were deployed, someone who we knew in our unit actually overdosed from the same pills that
From
I
the
was
prescription.
from the same type of I think it was oxycodone or something very common,
Oh,
hydrocodone.
yeah.
And he had overdosed. So when I came back and had my surgery, I was like, they just prescribed me the same pills that somebody that I knew died. So psychologically, like, cannabis didn't scare me. I know a ton of people that consume that. But this was the first person I'd ever known that was, regularly taking these drugs, and he had overdosed. This guy
So
was
you're like, I don't know about taking
best
this pill.
shape of his life, young guy. And I was just like, wow, that caught me off guard. So when I consumed cannabis, actually consumed purposely for my own medical benefit, and for 3 days I didn't need any opioids, I was like, I don't know any of the science, but there's something here. And that's through an anecdotal, like, community experience, through friends genuinely looking to help each other. Because if I'm telling him I'm fearful for these opioids because I know how they affect other people, to me, legal doesn't mean good and illegal doesn't mean bad. If I can improve my quality of life and I'm not doing anything harmful, and a friend recommended it, that was enough for me to kind of like look over the rabbit hole and go, there's a lot of people that could benefit from this.
That's very true, especially like we're in these early stages of regulation and having conversations about reschedule, deschedule on a federal level. But care providers have been there for a really long time, always providing the medicine that people needed, not out of necessarily like a desire to make profit, but just because you're recognizing the community has a need and we have a medicine that can help. Or even if we're not looking at it from the lens of a medicine, it's a plant that can help.
Absolutely.
When you were in that experience, what was that like? How do you grapple with that? Where that you're providing help, but you also recognize that you're putting yourself at great risk.
I mean, the risk part never really played a big role. Like, it's a deterrent in terms of the NYPD is constantly looking for essentially me, and if I get typecast, like stereotype for the kind of typecasting I would get stereotyped for. They're
like
right.
If you get
they
stopped,
did their job.
Yeah.
They did their job. Bingo. I did have drugs on me, and you made the right call. But at the same time, like, that's just kind of the PTSD that they say that minorities live with as a part of being minorities in this country. You're constantly kind of
looking over your shoulder.
Yeah,
or if you're not looking over your shoulder, if you're not perfect, they will take whatever probable cause they can get.
Exactly. So in the midst of, like, at one point I was providing deliveries. I had no delivery radius. I was 24/7. I was going 40 to 60 miles a day on a bike, delivering everywhere I could. And part of it was making ends meet, but at the same time, it was an entrepreneurial spirit. I didn't want to work for anybody else. I understood that providing this to my community was an alternative to other things I saw them getting on the streets. And even in the midst of some of those, like the party drugs that they consider approaching therapeutic at this point.
MDMA.
If I could, MDMA, ketamine,
LSD.
I was growing mushrooms for the better part of a decade also. So, like, those things, once I can provide a clean supply chain, it's almost like the people who put dye in GHB. Like, you keep it from being used for a malicious purpose, but you can make sure that the intended, clientele, the medicinal users, are able to get what they need out of it.
The original Good Shepherd. Yeah?
I wouldn't put it that way.
I mean, it is, because you're looking out for the community and you're doing it in a way where I feel like at least the care providers, even when we're talking about going way back in the day, care providers may not have had the access to testing and all the materials or processes that our regulated market now has, yet they were still taking the initiative to make sure that the product that they were providing was a high quality, because the desire wasn't necessarily this high level of profitability, although that's relevant in the trap. For the care providers, it was also providing a service to your community, and you couldn't feel good about doing that unless you felt good about what you were giving them.
I mean, I was always product test. Like nothing went to anybody else without me testing it. And it was like growing my own mushrooms to other like research and development products. So sometimes Steve had to test out a few things, but literally sometimes he tested out, like took stuff to the lab. I made tinctures during COVID, some of which were specifically for a teenage cancer patient. And so her family wanted a specific kind of product tailored for her. I made a different iteration that was for the guys, and I wanted both of them tested. And so, you know, that kind of thing was always.
You do what you can.
And everything you want to. Like, you know, you create your own reality.
Ooh, I like that. Well, okay, so tell me, what kind of realities are you guys creating now?
Yeah, I think obviously after some of those experiences that we had and just kind of seeing mental health wasn't just from a veteran's perspective. It wasn't just for somebody who's a survivor against cancer. It kind of rings through society as a whole that everybody's looking for help. I always say that nobody wakes up one day and wants to be an addict. People are typically looking for relief from a very specific stress. And if society doesn't offer them the proper education, the proper harm reduction, the proper means, you'll often find stress relief in maybe a bad place. And then that leads to addiction. But we hear addicts and we kind of like throw them off into the shelf, and people don't realize a lot of the people that are unhoused in this country are veterans who served. So people will say, I support the troops. And then they'll be like, oh, look at those homeless people. And I'm like, well, they weren't always addicts. This was a path of, hey, I'm looking for stress relief. Government told me all I can have is alcohol and the pills. Well, we kind of know what path that leads down. So that's kind of what we see as now that health and wellness is changing. It's becoming more dynamic. It's not just a buzzword.
Wellness is becoming a part of health.
It's individualized.
Part
Everybody's
of Western. I mean, it's always been a part of some of like the more traditional views on what health entails and what wellness, community, all those things that we kind of might take for granted sometimes.
I completely agree with you. It's kind of weird how we lost that in the Western world, because so much of it is preserved in Eastern medicine, or so much of it is preserved even in herbalism that comes out of Africa or Latin America. Like the way that, you know, the old curandera women of our communities back in the day would just put together a little herb for you, a little tea, some of these things tasted awful. But you were fixed the next day, and it didn't involve a lot of chemistry. It was just organic plant material.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very common. You know, we kind of joke about when we're younger and our grandparents, our uncles and aunts, they have essential oils. And I think when we were learning more, because the thing is, it used to just say, hey, can I get some? You didn't know about terpenes, you didn't know about THC, there was no strain name. You said, can I get some? And the answer was yes or no. But to now know that terpenes exist and to know terpenes are the same molecules as those essential oils that our families have been using. Well, the essential oils are part of our community.
I kind of have to say, like, I'm curious for you guys, what did that kind of affirmation mean? After so many years of being told like that our medicine is inferior, or that more homeopathic ways that were passed down to us were less than Western medicine, when you start to see the science reflect back that they knew something.
Yeah.
How did that trip you out? Obviously it tripped me out, but what kind of conclusions did you come to?
I think the balance is between our two stories. You know, I don't think Earl needed any affirmation from anyone.
Yeah.
for his belief.
Part of it hasn't sunk in. I think yes, there is a, you know what it is. Like, I was always going to do what I wanted to. There was no law, or it was going to be my path. But your question has me reeling, because I'm like, what does that really implicate? Like, I know our course in ACEs, it has a whole new world in terms of viability and the importance of the next generation and their outlook, their perception, because that's going to determine a lot of what senior care becomes. Like, people don't realize that. We can talk to people our age, we can talk to people a little older all we want to, but we're not going to be making decisions very soon. So,
yeah.
And what are the kids going to think about it? You're right, because growing up, it was villainized or it was less than. So then as I got older, even though you know what works though when you get it from your family and you stick to your traditions, but also it does make you second guess yourself. And then when you start second guessing yourself in something like that, being able to take care of yourself, and society and the medical world are telling you, no, you're wrong, that doesn't work at all. It makes you question other avenues. Like I can see in entrepreneurship, how then it makes you question, like, wait, do I know what I'm doing? Am I? Or even having a ton of military experience, but then coming home and being told the military is this, veterans are that, they need charity. So many veterans don't accept help because they don't want to be thought of as charity cases, but they do want an opportunity to show you what they're made of and what they can bring to the table. And the previously, at least in the hiring world, in the corporate world, the thought a few years ago was, well, we got to spin them up so they know how to handle. And it's like, my friend, I'm so sorry. Have you ever managed a few fire teams while also coming under fire and getting all your logistics and special duties done? Yeah. No, like we're just not speaking the right language. Absolutely. You know, I think the veteran community, I'm kind of curious to learn what you think about how the different ways that the veteran community is misinterpreted.
Yeah, I think that people misinterpret the veteran community, at least regarding this conversation specifically, as veterans. You have to think about the fact that we lose more veterans to PTSD and mental health than actual combat. So the conversation we had earlier today was about the warrior mindset. And society would tell you that the warrior mindset is go as hard as you can until you can't anymore. And what we realize now is by the time you can't go anymore, you've already pushed too far. So I think that people don't realize veterans are moms and dads. Veterans are farmers. Veterans are business owners. Veterans are your teachers. And when you realize that they're quite literally from every demographic of society, there is no, oh, veterans look this way. This is what a veteran is. It's some of everybody. So if we actually accepted everybody, then we would genuinely accept all of our veterans. And if we genuinely accepted all of our veterans, our society would probably be a little more together because we represent every group.
That's what I always thought was so amazing is you bring little groups of people from every group into one organization to accomplish a common mission. And there's something like really beautiful about that when it's bigger than yourself and it's working for the right reasons.
Yeah, I think the opposite is like what you said about leadership is something that was really interesting to me is I was like, oh, these people have MBAs in the corporate world. And I'm coming from coaching and a Marine. And they would say, you know, but when it's time to get people in a room and something needs to get done,
who are you going to call?
Yeah, logistically, I'm just like, hey, you guys can tiptoe around this or you can give me 5 minutes and I'll straighten the room out. And I realize a lot of that is the good balance between our, you know, kind of our business. I like logic. I like science. I like very concrete paths. Maybe my paths are less risky, but I think that if you understand the audience that you're talking to, these veterans necessarily, not all veterans are pro-cannabis, even if they can benefit from it. So the conversations that we have are very dynamic and meeting people where they are and then empowering them to then speak on their own behalf.
What are some of the approaches that you've seen from the industry or people who mean well, but I don't know if you can relate to it at all, but I can relate to a lot of people are like, we support our veterans. And it's such a I am not going to curse. It's such a gimmick. Clearly it triggers me, but because it's one thing to say it and then put like your lamppost green for a day, but what does that action actually, where's the action? Like, and it does feel like a little bit of tokenism where we'll put the veterans out front, even though there's really no action on it.
Right.
So we can say we serve, you know, it's confusing for some of us veterans because then you don't know who to trust. Like, what are some of the other approaches that you've seen where maybe the industry missed the mark?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that not understanding that things like the war on drugs We're both from Chicago. I tell people, if you see the news and people say Chicago's so violent, it's so bad. And I say Chicago is what the war on drugs looks like when it was successful. When the war on drugs is successful, it goes into a specific neighborhood, it criminalizes certain people with no true evidence or reason.
Right.
And you can tear down businesses, you can tear down economic, revenue generating for that community. So us kind of seeing that and realizing those are also veterans. So a lot of times when we harm other Americans, we're like, you support the troops, but you're harming other Americans. Those thought processes kind of contradict, because the troops aren't just one group of people. We're supposed to represent each other, but it's like, just my troops to look like me. It's either all or nothing, right?
I feel like that's something about the veteran population, and I could be wrong and more biased, but one thing that I feel centers me and keeps me grounded, especially in the cannabis industry, is there's a bigger mission, and we have to be focused on the whole in a way where we maintain, because, and I've said it a couple of times, like I've worked for 3 presidential administrations during my time, and that we have to maintain a level of neutrality. And it's because there's supposed to be this guardianship of the people that's bigger than us. So then when it came to seeing what was happening with cannabis and how against the will of the people it is, it's so like disjointed for me, because we serve and we're there to help the country and be the sword and the shield. Yet, like internally, we have a couple of issues that it's like I'm grappling with how we're going to reconcile this, and it begins with cannabis, but it bleeds into so many other areas of life. Like, how do you grapple with the discrepancies and keep moving forward?
I think the relationship to medical patients, honestly, has been what's helped. If I put a name on my group, I say I'm a veteran. Why are you a medical patient too? Because there's medical patients that aren't veterans. So are you willing to silo yourself, or are you willing to build community with other individuals and then connect where you
see the bigger picture, where you're connected in ways that unify.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's one of the bigger ways that we've connected to people in the midst of going to several conferences and speaking at different events and having our own events. I think that finding common ground, it helps you like open people's mind to the prospects of some of the good things that we can do, as Currency would say. So that kind of thing, when my mom has arthritis pains or something like that, and I can provide her a topical, and Steve can come in and then provide the science on why she's not going to get high. But if you wanted to, I can we can shout out our partner. And I always have to validate what I'm doing with her, because
it's your mom.
I went to school for engineering. I ended up with a degree in marketing. She was not pleased. I made it work without having to work. Like after I left finance, I worked independently, solely. And one of my sisters does something very similar. The other one is very successful doing, she just left Essence and she's now at BET. And my only grievance is she took my niece to Atlanta with her, but that's a sign of success.
That's a good grievance. That you care and you're connected and you guys are that close. Aww.
Yeah.
I think what you've really illustrated is how it all ties back to the bigger picture, and it's got to be about a bigger mission. And it sounds so cliche to say that, but when you are in those moments where you're like, there's a discrepancy and I'm torn, go back to who you're really serving, right? And it's the people.
Absolutely.
With that said, leaning into the curiosity of excitement about who y'all are serving, because there's a level of potentiality. I think when you look at athletic performance, the endocannabinoid system, and what you mentioned earlier, being able to train your body endogenously to produce cannabinoids that have existed well before the plant. Like you mentioned mom, but there are natural endogenous cannabinoids in breast milk, and it helps with that relationship between mother and baby, and also baby's health. It's a part of the whole system of it all. And there's other endogenous cannabinoids. Tell me more about what you guys are leaning into and how you are taking what you're finding with athletes, cannabis use. It's been a long MJ biz, right?
Yeah,
but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what you're finding. and how you're tying it to how people can improve their lives even without the plant.
Yeah, I think that something that's been really interesting has been, as Earl said, is watching the industry evolve. And when I say the industry, you know, it's like when was the initiation or the beginning of the industry? So it's all been a blur, honestly. But there are steps along the path that can make things feel a little bit more concrete, almost like a checkpoint in a video game. So a lot of the work that we've been preparing for has been waiting for some of those checkpoints to happen. So some of those checkpoints I would equate to as the NBA publicly saying we're no longer drug testing, and then the NFL and UFC saying it. And then you're just like, okay, I see a trend. And then the NCAA comes out, which regulates young athletes, amateur athletics. And they come out and say we're no longer banning cannabinoids from our 500,000 athletes of colleges across the U.S.
And you work with someone who that really, so I'm from Austin. You work with Ricky Williams from Heisman, and it really impacted his career and the trajectory of his life. And Ricky was a hero to the city of Austin, like a legend. Watching a young athlete go through such an experience where you put them on this pedestal with exceptional high performance, and he's self-medicating without realizing it. And the punishment that ensued, like, tell me about how your program can help educate the people so that way other athletes who are looking for ways to self-treat, because we know that cannabis, like, why did the NFL start to change course? They saw, just like with the veteran population, that cannabis has beneficial effects on inflammation that you see with traumatic brain injury, which happens at a really high rate for football players, almost just as high as it would if you were a military veteran going through those bumpy experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, when we say those checkpoints, like the testing, the other side of that is the data behind human performance and the actual science behind some of this. So in the military, we know one of the leading causes of death is suicide. That's number 2 in the NCAA. So people would say, oh, athletes and the veterans, I see similarities in their performance. But if those are 2 of the leading causes of death, these are some of the most fit people, some people that are like in the best shape of their life. So I think a lot of times when we hear mental health, it gets this negative connotation of someone who's weak. And to find out that it's actually the strongest people who we look at publicly, that changes the narrative of the conversation. And I think that's why courses like ACEs that we're working on, you say, when you bring up Ricky, you know, that we've been blessed to work with and hear his story more often. Rick loves the course, and we're thinking about what if Rick had the opportunity to have a course like this? What if the NCAA understood this when Sha'Carri Richardson was grieving her mom? What if all
awful, witnessing that?
So when you think about that, and you think about how it relieves stress, and that was something that she found out that her mom had passed, people would say, "Oh, we want to support someone who's just lost their mom." But then when they find out.
They took it
not
out.
Like that.
They were so hard on her. It was I couldn't believe it.
And it's disproportionate to how they come down on
someone else.
Someone of majority.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers can say he's going to go do ayahuasca in a cabin, and
and maybe they'll make fun of him for his politics or that.
He can work for Johnson & Johnson and talk.
But also that.
Let's not get off track.
And I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, because there is, and it took a while before they even got to that, because he could say what he wanted to, had to say it consistently for a while, and then maybe got some chastising. But you're right, he still gets the deals. And for her, the punishment was so severe. They took away her opportunities. Not that they gave her,
right,
that she earned,
right, and
that yes, there's a space that has been created, but no one has given this space. It's been earned by all the athletes who have. This is one thing about I love sports, and I love the business of sports too. And this is one area where there's a lot of interesting dynamics at play. It also kind of mirrors the cannabis industry, where you have these leagues that develop, but they don't pay their athletes. And it starts at first because they don't have the revenue, because a new sport, it's hard to do.
Right.
Like we see it in jiu-jitsu. But we just had a big event in jiu-jitsu that was completely disruptive, where they paid an athlete $1 million, like the Craig Jones Invitational, and it blew all of the other competitors out of the water. They were saying that they couldn't pay the athletes because it wasn't there. But as soon as he found a way to formulate to get the athletes paid, the event organically like empowered them. And so when it comes to the leagues and seeing what they did to Sha'Carri and how she had earned it, and yet they took it away as if they had given it to her, there's something to be said about, no, because we built that empire. We built this opportunity for you to even profit off of sports.
I think a lot of it ties into some of what Steve and I were talking about on the panel earlier today. The endocannabinoid system is so much older than all of us, and it's in so many things that once we stop perceiving cannabis as just a drug, and even just as like a plant, like we can broaden this conversation in people's minds. So education helps the conversation like just be more relatable but more palatable, because once you think of it like that, it's not so much that we need to restrict the use of a plant or you can't move it across arbitrary lines that we've created. Like it becomes more,
like fluid, like more. It becomes more.
Mm.
It's hard to put your finger on the word, but I feel like it becomes more true, and that's hard to identify because our understanding of it is so
true,
limited.
Yeah, I think education has translated now into marketing, and marketing translates into brand. So now you're like, hey, I just gave you some information. Okay, well now you're with someone and you see a certain product. Well, because you're educated, now you ask a question about the product. Your question of the product now just took into account the quality of the product. So now that goes into the brand's identity, all because you gained a little piece of knowledge. So the more information we can share publicly, when we create courses like ACEs for athletes, just because the NCAA said, hey, we're removing cannabinoids from our banned substance list. Well, now there's an accountability on the NCAA's behalf because these are 18-year-old kids and they're all in different states. You like play football at USC in California, and then the next time you're in Texas, and the next time you're in Alabama, the laws change.
Like we saw with the Tyson fight, Texas has its rules and no cannabis. I wonder how it affected that, but we don't have to go too deep into that because a lot of people have their speculation on what affected what, whether it was his cannabis use, whether it was other things, whether it was money, whether it was boxing. That's
I'm glad he got paid.
Like, you ever seen Pulp Fiction?
Yeah.
There you go. And the fifth, your ass goes down.
Pride.
Feel a slight sting. That's pride.
Yeah, but the reality too, though, is that for the sport of boxing, which was, it does well in Mexico, but in the United States, as far as the younger generations, it's having a much harder time, especially when you look at what UFC is doing. And now other sports, including jiu-jitsu, which is such a nerdy, like I'm going to make fun of us for a bit. It is such a funny, weird, nerdy sport. But then, no?
You keep saying it's new, and I'm like, it's so old.
It is so old.
I'll give you that some of the leagues.
It is so old.
Some of the, ancient, but
Yeah.
some of the leagues I would expect are newer. But I keep thinking back to Steve talks to me about pickleball often.
Pickleball?
And like,
I've still never played pickleball.
so both are popular in Brooklyn, like widespread communities. But like pickleball has so much potential and growth, and it's unprecedented almost because it has investors from like KD to like current former athletes, and they have a ridiculous amount of money that they. It's kind of like it ties into the same thing that we're trying to
that's
cover.
kind of like what
Marketing
I
is what we're
saw
really
as
talking
what
about,
Mike was trying to do for boxing was when you have been a successful athlete, and I feel like that's what Craig Jones was doing at least and I don't mean new, like jiu-jitsu is not new. Jiu-jitsu is an ancient practice, but the industry of it is really becoming something new, and it's good for the athletes. It's just the way that people can shape how we develop these economies. Like for a long time, many of the leagues were saying it's inaccessible to everyone. And it parallels what people say in the cannabis industry was like, it's inaccessible to the craft, so let the MSOs have it. Or the MSOs are corrupt, so let only the craft have it. And there's gotta be multiple answers, but one of them definitely has to be compensating and taking care of the people who are building it out, like just like in sports. And that means, especially in sports like fight sports, where the body is taking a toll, it's important that we provide healthcare, preventative healthcare to those people. Like what we're seeing with the athletes and traumatic brain injury, and then how it can lead to really chaotic life events that they would maybe not otherwise even be. When you shake your brain that hard, it changes things, you know? I feel like I could go on, but I really want to hear what you guys have to say. Like, how do you see us solving the problem? And tell me more about ACEs especially. Because it sounds like you guys are doing what we hope the cannabis industry would do more often, which is develop the self-regulation so that way you can solve the problem before it even starts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that I think that part of what makes ACEs successful right now is the big uptake in sports marketing. When you watch sports on television, you're getting advertised food, you're getting advertised beverages, you're getting advertised beer. We don't realize that athletics actually influence a lot of the basic decisions we make in society because you saw that product during the commercial. Because who was taking cold baths 10 years ago? Okay, who was doing jujitsu 10 years ago? Who was doing yoga? So these are things that if it becomes part of Western sports marketing, now the culture, now everybody's doing jujitsu after work, now everybody's doing yoga.
And it normalizes
so ACEs as a course follows this same model. There's athletes that have been consuming cannabis for a long time. You're artist, you playing guitar, you can consume as much as you want. Society loves them. That athlete is ridiculed. So that's what we really want to bring into, like, there's a misunderstanding there because we can really use this course to help educate athletes on their own behalf, but also society should understand, why would an athlete put their career on the line for this? No. That's the only thing sustaining their career because of the amount of stress that they're going through. So, yeah.
I think that was a great answer.
I think it was a really nice reframing of the speculation. Like, will they put their career on the line? You're like, no, this is actually contributing to why they have it.
Yeah, and we follow athletes. It's like, oh, this athlete has this new brand. This athlete has these new shoes. So it's like, when we meet athletes, they tell us, I no longer want to represent a brand that I'm going to find out is evil in 5 years. I don't want to represent a brand and find out my money and my reputation are going towards X, Y, and Z. So if they already consume cannabis and we can educate them, they're like, I would love to put my name behind a brand like this. And to work with Rick, who was one of the first people who put his name and brand out there, it really helps solidify that, like, this is a path that is not going anywhere.
I mean, I have to say, as a Texan, well, hold on, I want to hear. No, not me. Hold on. I'm gonna hold on. You go.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, I think that a few things in the midst of the market's maturity and development have provided a landscape for us to talk about this more freely. So things like USC partnered with cookies, and it's like an ad deal that I believe specifies that you'll start to see it in the next season. There was another deal where Facebook's going to start to be more lenient. Instagram, they had some conflict with Puffco.
And so, well, Instagram a few weeks ago was like, we're going to stop doing it. And then my account came back, and then now it's all messed up again. So I was like, okay.
Then I have nothing bad to say about Instagram. I apologize for any slander that I...
And we're going to shake the episode after and tap to make sure we don't get reported. No.
I want to anger the algorithm.
But you're right. People want to work with good people because there's a legacy. Like KG, I grew up split between Minnesota and Texas. So Kevin Garnett, even though the Timberwolves didn't do much for him while he was there, he was something to follow. And then when he went to the Celtics, it wasn't hard to want to go with them. Like,
what's the Celtics though?
Yeah, I just love KG. Minnesota.
Much love for KG.
Yeah.
And I mean, that makes me think about Paul Pierce though, in terms of his experience in the cannabis industry.
Go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. It just wasn't all roses in terms of some of his investments didn't go the way he thought they would, and he didn't necessarily have the guidance. He had people that knew he had money and viable.
And that breaks your heart when you know people want to come in with a good intention and they unfortunately run into the people who have less good intentions first.
Sometimes it's also just general misguidance. I worked in sports tech and strength conditioning. Earl worked in finance with professional athletes. A lot of times they have advisors. So the athlete's playing and somebody comes to them and says, hey, you have a company? I got one athlete that I want to market your product.
And the advisor's taking...
Some of them like to think they're handlers.
Yeah.
They might overstep in terms of the familiarity they provide on the tail. Like if they're working with a third party logistics provider, they make it seem like they're super close with Klay Thompson, and it's like,
well, we can't really fault the athletes or the advisors for that, because it's almost exactly like the legislators. It's like whoever gives them the information first usually gets to guide that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're like, hey, I get a small kickback from each athlete that I recommend to your business. Well, then you find out that I have a sports agency with 200 athletes. So now I have each athlete giving you $10K. Now I'm getting a percentage off of that. And the athlete's like, what company is this? What brand do I represent? So now, genuinely in cannabis, we've had professional athletes, some of the biggest names in the industry, both in cannabis and in sports. And they're like, I don't want to represent a brand I don't know. I want to know the farmer. I want to know the farmer's family. I want to understand, is it organic? I want to understand all the processes. And the truth is, that's how you get quality and education into the market. And if the brand's athletes are going to be the ones who do it, that's when we really are like, hey, the needle just moved just a little bit, because people aren't just showing up with the name. I'm a famous person who I have this much time left before the next generation comes in.
I love that you're sharing that, because it's really good information for anyone who's considering it and isn't in, like, to have. But the other good information is that, like, when you were talking about, it's a symbiotic cycle. Because if the athletes come in demanding better performance, better quality from a company, and that becomes the minimum expectation, then bad actors who aren't going to do that are going to have to change business if they're going to want to stay in business, or they're going to just go out of business.
Absolutely.
And it keeps perpetuating and feeding itself also into that cycle of education, because now we're leveling up in a way where we're becoming a better business. We're helping to protect the athlete's brand and legacy, which they, like, I don't think people understand. Of course they would be protective of it, because the sacrifice, the lifetime of sacrifice that they put into, like, the expectation, especially on young athletes, is insane. It looked like you wanted to say something.
Especially given what they've seen other figures go through, like what they've had their likeness used for, as far as what they might have been promised. I don't want us to mention any campaigns that are currently ongoing, so I'm being very careful. But some of what we've seen here in Vegas is just like eye-opening as to what could be versus what we would love for reality to look like.
I think it's actually really valuable that we address that, because we are all here at MJ Biz, and this is supposed to be a real conversation, not just like, we're at MJ Biz and it's so great and everything's wonderful and everybody's transacting and all the transactions are great. And they're going to be all good transactions in 2025. Every deal you make here on the floor is just going to really just kill it next year. That's not real. There's no. And it's important that you're bringing this up, because I think one of the questions, not to focus on the negative, but redirecting it, like, one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, or I'd want at least anyone who's watching to ask themselves, is how can I be more discerning? And I'm curious, like, with your background in finance and, like, knowledge of, you got a depth of wisdom that I know is well beyond your years. Like, you have this because I don't know why, but you got it. You can just tell, you ooze it. And also your experience in the military, everything that you guys are bringing to the table. How do you discern for yourselves? Like, what strategies are you using to, and it doesn't have to even be, something super strategic. It can just be like your gut feeling. But how are y'all discerning out here at MJ Biz? Because I think one thing that's important, just like in sports, is to help people tap into their own knowing, like their own understanding of their body and what feels good and what's not. That's a warning. How do y'all do it?
I think experience is the best experience. And I think that if you're in a market where, say, Texas, it's illegal to have cannabis experience, and then tomorrow they say it's recreationally illegal and they need people with 25 years of cannabis experience. So that is something that is very common. You'll have people that show up and they say, hey, I just came from tech. Hey, I just came from these other industries that are failing, and we have capital, so capital wins. Well, not necessarily if you don't understand the dynamics of the economy. People will say, oh, people are going to buy cannabis anywhere, so let's make as much as possible. Whereas people who've been consuming for a long time are like, well, you're going to bottom out the prices because you're going to mass produce, because that's basic supply and demand and economics. So it's very interesting seeing a conference like this where some people are following the public narratives that they see from major businesses, And some people actually look at the economics of there was no industry before this. You know what there was? People with experience. So it's very interesting hearing people that, claim they have money and they can build the future with no experience. And then people have a wealth of experience where it's like, how do I build my own path into
And
this?
how do we get the money?
Yeah.
Whew. What about for you?
I mean, I think that there's a fine line between being too discerning and being too open. But at the conference, I think that we've been blessed to be surrounded by a lot of individuals that, despite it being our first time meeting face to face, we've been on Zoom meetings for what feels like years, like just planning every aspect of what's going to go wrong, not just what could go, but just the inevitability.
Murphy.
So like that kind of thing, like meeting their circle of people that we now trust and starting to be like, you can be less discerning a little bit. I can let my guard down personally if I know that Steve has somebody that he's recommending us. So
Yes.
so his circle can become my circle more easily than I'd let someone from the outside in. But also I think that in the midst of letting people talk who like to talk, you could hear a lot of what they got to say. And I can just sit back and I'll listen. And if I have, like, I can generally think of some common ground that I share because I've done stuff from farm to table to end user, like hands-on. So if somebody's really been about it and they're talking about it, then I'll hear that. But if they are perpetuating somebody else's story, or you're saying something you've heard and it doesn't quite click, it's like, okay, say less. No, keep going. Please, please, please. Because you tell the truth, whether you want to or not.
Experience.
It always reveals itself.
Absolutely.
Damn. I hate to let y'all go.
Oh, I mean, it's been delightful.
Thank you. I'd love to hear, as we're wrapping up MJ Biz and what we're calling, I guess people are calling Weed Week in Vegas, and the Super Bowl, apparently, alleged. I don't, NFL don't sue me. I don't have anything anyway. Good luck. The Super Bowl of cannabis. Like, what are you most looking forward to? And what are your closing thoughts on the whole experience?
Yeah, I think this is my fourth time here. We actually originally at our conference earlier this year said there's no way we're going to go to Vegas unless there's an actual opportunity where we see we can move something forward. And I think that when we see some of those checkpoints in the industry happen, where like the NCAA ruling just happened in June, but that also signified like, hey, there's potential change coming. So I think outside of the conference, coming here and networking with other brands and being able to talk about the ACES course in person, it's the one thing that's different from being on Zoom for a long time where people live in different places. The truth is, this 1 week brings together all sides of the industry, old, new, veteran, medical patient. And if you find your genuine community, you can build your own pathway forward with support. So yeah, please go to Anzisha.com, AnzishaConsulting.com. Please look up the ACES course. ACES stands for Athletes, Cannabinoids, and the Endocannabinoid System. And in 2025, we'll be launching that for sports leagues, professional and amateur, all over the world.
I can't wait to see it in Texas.
Oh, I thought you closed everything.
No, I want your
What was
final
the
thoughts too. You have so much wisdom to offer. Final thoughts on the overall experience, and then what are you looking forward to in the new year?
So in addition to trying to push the ACES course, I'd love to see that go somewhere between 6 Stigma courses and the Title IX like required coursework of what everyone needs to take to be able to be around other people functionally. Because there is something along the lines of being understanding of what other people are going through. Like the same way we have neurodivergent conversations now, and it's not just saying the R word in terms of, because my mom used to lovingly say that about me growing up, and it's like, now it's like, hey, we shouldn't even say that out loud jokingly at church. Like, so I think those kind of conversations should be open from both sides, even if you don't think that you need to know. It's like, I would never harass like, that's what Title IX is in terms of that. I'm being clear. It's a specific required coursework.
To make sure that you have the bare minimum just as a good citizen.
I mean, and from school's perspective, it's a risk mitigation thing because they made an investment. These student athletes, they're the
driving force.
They're the
Oh,
investment
you don't
of
even
the
have to
sport.
dance around it. You
Behind
don't have
the
to dance around
billion-dollar
it. They are
corporation.
building the campuses.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, I think that
I have to say, I mean, we could go on a little bit, but I was very excited to see when the ruling came down that the athletes could start to make their own money. And I could never understand for the life of me why they would be asked to potentially sacrifice their entire career and play ball for the full term, but not get paid, and not even get close to sacrifice their career. Why play? They're playing a professional sport that is broadcast and profited on. They should get a cut.
It's the same thought as when they get offered a free internship, like in New York. It's like, oh, for the opportunity, like we're gonna give you the publicity you need to get where you want to be, and it's the same guise of dangling things in front of you.
It's
I was supposed to be making a
nonsensical
closing statement. I apologize for taking us on a whole tangent.
No, I love it actually.
That's
but
the issue is the love of the game. That was the reason. That was the justification.
If you really want to make it,
professional athletes are pros and they make money, but the NCAA is the amateur athletics. And the amateurs should play for the love of the game and learn how to really. And the truth is, some of those athletes, as amateurs and 18 to 22-year-olds, make a school billions and billions of dollars, and they never make it pro to make $1 off of it. So is it amateur if it is a revenue generating role? And that's why the change happened. And now athletes again are saying, if I represent the school, what else do I represent? Do I represent brands in my community? What other messages can I push forward? So athletes are really taking a big role in society, and I'm glad that we have athletes to support us.
I think it's a good change. Like it'll have multiple ripple effects, because now the athletes are considering their influence, which is enormous. Yeah. We have these athletic figures who literally can influence the nation, and we weren't paying them.
I mean, EA Sports was getting paid. That wasn't important.
Exactly. All of the broadcast networks, like that's billions of dollars, and we can't get these kids their cut of what they created. It does get me fired up, but what about your hope?
No, I was just saying that I agree. In terms of taking us.
So what about your final hope for the future?
I'm hoping that we can work with one of our up-and-coming partners, Sports and Cannabis, to be at the Super Bowl in New Orleans. If I spoke like things into reality, we'd be there with Ricky, since he used to play there. Currency used to do jet lounges and House of Blues. Ooh. So that'd be an ideal kind of event to bring a lot of us together. Not necessarily as like a MJ Biz, but just as like people are going to be there. The culture there is amazing. Right. So being able to embrace all of those things, I haven't gotten to go. So like, I'd love for that to be something to happen next year, and for us to just be able to expand ACEs and use events like that nationally to amplify the messaging. The last thing would be MCBA, the Minority Cannabis Business Association.
Yes.
We're looking at the opportunities of building out an incubator. Absolutely. We're hoping to build out an incubator program with them. And so.
Ooh, I love this.
Right. And
yes.
They have the equity tour.
She's my coffee date in Texas.
Okay. I was going to say, yeah.
Yes.
I believe we were all together when we
went.
went.
I feel like you're speaking things into existence, because I know Frederica gets shit done.
Absolutely.
So
Madam
I'm
President.
excited. Yes, right. Madam President. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. It's our last episode. It's been a long week, but if this wasn't probably one of my favorite ways to spend an evening out here in Vegas, just sitting around a table, having a great conversation and unwinding with a little bit of some THC flower. And I don't have any final thoughts. I feel like you guys really summed it up. You're the perfect ending to a really incredible experience.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for joining us. This has been quite a trip. We did it. We've got 10 episodes in 3 days, and that's kind of crazy. This has been MJ Biz Weed Week, Super Bowl of Cannabis. I don't know, but I'm very happy and excited about what lays ahead for all of us. So all of you out there who are watching, don't forget to always stay elevated and stay highly informed. I'm Shaun Salvaje. Thanks for tuning in.